Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, otherwise known as AISA. I'm your host, as always, David Willett, and it is my pleasure to have you with us as we explore the diverse voices of the Australian cyber industry. Welcome back to Cyber Voices. Very excited today. I've got two very interesting individuals in the studio with me. Sitting across from me, we have the fabulous Tom Huth, Cyber Incident Coordination at the Australian Energy Market Operator, also known as AEMO, where he is responsible for coordinating responses to significant incidents across the national and wholesale electricity markets and gas systems. Tom also leads AEMO's Cyber Incident Response Exercise Program, where he was the lead planner for the exercise series that we will be discussing more today, Trident and Trident 2. Tom, welcome to Cyber Voices.
Thanks, great to be here.
Excellent, great to have you. And joining us for a second time, I think this is the first time we've had a return guest, it is the equally as fabulous Ryan Mclaren, who is the co-founder and chief operating officer at Retrospect Labs, a startup that specializes in cybersecurity exercises and helps organizations prepare for their next incident. Ryan has a background in cybersecurity incident response, having previously worked at the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, and also spent some time leading incident response and threat intelligence for a major energy provider. Ryan, welcome back to Cyber Voices.
Thanks for having me again, Dave. Must have done something right last time.
I read out the names of two interesting exercises that you were involved with, which were the Trident exercises. So let's start with what's the big picture? What is the Trident exercise series?
There's a bit of a complicated history to it all, but I suppose for a long time now, we've obviously been conducting joint cybersecurity exercises in the energy sector, and there's some kind of known good models for that out of the US where they do things like GridX over there. And for a long time, we've been doing similar kinds of exercises in Australia. I was very fortunate to join the AEMO team about 2.5 years ago now. And when I joined, we were reviewing the plans, the existing arrangements, and really we wanted to put some focus into reigniting some of the work around cyber exercises for the energy sector. And in particular, delivering a larger scale joint cybersecurity exercise where the only real threat was a cyber scenario. Often historically, they had been a joint cyber threat with maybe a significant weather event or some other kind of physical threat. So it's sort of purely a bottom-up cyber-driven exercise scenario with a large number of energy organizations participating and practicing cyber incident response together.
I guess one thing to note with the start of the Trident series and our early discussions between AEMO and Retrospect Labs, we were really keen to build on some of the good foundational groundwork that had been laid. As Tom mentioned, the sector had previously participated in a number of exercises, including the GridX series. And we really wanted to up the ante with the Trident exercises. So looking at the way those exercises had been run in the past, thinking about the different skills, knowledge, and the outcomes for those participating organizations, and really offer them something similarly aligned, but just upping the ante a little bit, turning up that spice dial to really make sure that those outcomes were there. And we were really helping the sector improve their incident response readiness capability.
How large a participation are we talking about here?
Yeah, so the first year we ran it, there were probably 23 organizations participating in, and probably, we don't have exact numbers for individual participants, but well over 250 or 300 individual participants. We ran it in 3 exercises. So we split that group into multiple sort of mini exercises, if you will. In the second time round, we instead ran it as a single large exercise. So there was about 27 organizations participating in that single exercise over the course of a few days. And best numbers we have are about 560 individual participants that second time around across industry and government.
Which is, I think, a super awesome achievement and pretty significant. And I guess I'd just throw in there the criticality of those organizations. So not just the number of them, but we are talking about that very top tier of some of our most critical infrastructure organizations, especially within the energy sector. So being able to take so many resources offline and have them dedicated to participating in this exercise, kudos not just to AEMO for, putting that out there, driving it and owning it, but also to those participating organizations that did give up so much of their time, their resourcing to participate in the exercise series as well.
Yeah, that kind of been easy to get that level of engagement. What are some of the challenges in creating scenarios that are, realistic and appropriate for such a wide range of participants to ensure you get the right engagement?
I think we're very fortunate that we have a very good team, both within AEMO, within Retrospect Labs, but also within our participants that works on the exercise. I think they're genuinely fantastic. I think there's a few principles that we kind of take into delivering the exercise that pay dividends. One of them is that it has to be technically credible from the ground up, and that's a really hard thing to do, to your point. But scenario that isn't technically credible pulls people out of what they're doing immediately in an exercise and just devalues it very, very quickly. We develop a bit of a framework for a scenario as opposed to a prescriptive scenario itself. And then we've been very fortunate that the people that we plan the exercise with across all the participant organizations, fantastic, and they know their environment well, and they do the work to make that scenario work in their environment. So if you can imagine, we come up with a bit of a framework for the scenario, and they really put the meat on the bones for that and work out how to execute it within their own kind of environment and context. And so I think leveraging that flexibility, giving everyone something that's technically credible as the basis for them to build on and make something that's relevant to their environment is kind of key to the success with that number of stakeholders, because you couldn't plan a detailed scenario for 27 organizations and 560 people. Like, it just wouldn't work.
We have a very heavy reliance on using real tradecraft tactics, techniques, procedures, real adversary activities that we've observed occurring in the wild, and making that scenario as realistic as possible. Tom mentioned that kind of framework approach to designing the exercise scenario. And I guess what's important there from my perspective to note is really enabling a high level of customization almost for those participating entities. So they can choose things like which hosts are impacted in their environment to simulate a certain consequence or a simulated impact as a result of the incident. So it looks and feels really realistic for them rather than just a generic, here's your exercise scenario, everyone undertake the same thing. There's a very high degree of that customization, which really makes it much more impactful and much more realistic for them when they're undertaking the exercise. It's really important to have them along for that journey with us as we're designing the exercise and getting them ready to be exercise ready so that they're actually able to participate in it and achieve those outcomes based on the inputs they've selected.
You've got 27 organizations. I'm sure all really wanted to be there, but again, how do you make sure that everyone involved is getting some equal level of learning and benefit out of something this broad? I mean, I'm in awe of it, which is why I'm asking.
I think so. To go maybe a step back and just talk to the objectives for the exercise for a moment. So the first objective is obviously just to get everyone practicing their incident response activities first and foremost. Now, AEMO also selfishly has an objective that we want to practice sector-wide response, and that's because we've got a formal responsibility under the national electricity rules to coordinate that kind of response activity, and we want to test our own plans and arrangements around that. We also have another responsibility in the national electricity market for security maturity uplift, and that's really where exercises come into play. And one of the objectives for Trident is that we want to push and we want to provide the framework for participants to take on more mature, more sophisticated exercise activity than they've previously done. And so, as you can imagine, with 27 organizations, you're talking wildly different maturities, wildly different appetites for complex exercise activity, wildly different appetites for having certain stakeholders involved in exercises. And so the scenario framework we use involves a concept we call tracks, right? So there's a tabletop track typically, and historically there's been a tabletop track. And then there's been more functional tracks of participation that allow organizations to, instead of sitting around a table and talking about what they would do in response to a given scenario, which can be really valuable, instead, what if we give them some technical artifacts that we've prepared in advance for them to work through and then actually undertake some forensics activities, test some of their more detailed response and analysis processes and that kind of thing. And then at the more extreme end, what if we instead execute some things in your own technology environment so that you can then go and use your tools, your techniques, your playbooks, your runbooks to go and work through that process. So sort of there's this spectrum of maturity that we kind of create tracks to allow participants from sort of any part of that spectrum to participate in. And I think that's how we make sure that organizations who are more mature, less mature can still get something out of it. And I think there's immense value in having the more mature organizations exercising along those with lower maturity or less appetite as well, because that's how we learn and kind of grow from working with one another.
Yeah, and a lot of that's complemented by those interactive elements that still occur regardless of how technically mature you are and therefore what track you participate in. So even if you're at that more pointy end of technical capability or incident response readiness, and you're still undertaking that fully functional track that Tom mentioned, where we've, seeded artifacts within your environment, you're using your own tooling, testing your own data flows, investigating to understand what's occurred, drafting sit reps, drafting media advisories, or you're at that more tabletop discussion-based level where you're exercising more, on paper, based on outputs that we provide you of technical analysis rather than undertaking technical analysis. You might still be doing things like picking up the phone to call the AEMO cyber duty manager, or you might still be notionally reporting through to the Department of Home Affairs or the Australian Cybersecurity Centre through some of the features and functionality that we enable through our support of the exercise. So even though those three different levels of technical difficulty and different levels of different modes of play, there's still that ability to have that hands-on interactive element complementing the exercise as well. And I think that's the part that people can get a bit more involved in, and it doesn't just feel like a standard sit in a room and have a chat about how you go. There's that really live kind of element to it, which makes it more dynamic and more fun.
Give us a bit more of a feel as to how something like this works over the days that it operates.
Depending what track you're in, our goal is to make it look and feel like it is a real incident. Mm-hmm. So that might include, those investigative hunt activities within your environment. If you have undertaken that functional, fully pre-seeded track, that might involve, as I mentioned, spinning up a case in your case management system, preparing SITREP reports, drafting media statements, etc., etc., etc. So from an exercise control perspective, we're all in a room administering and facilitating the delivery of the exercise. So being able to keep them fully engaged across those 2 days really comes down to making it really interactive and quite a dynamic style of exercising. So hopefully for those participating organizations, it does look and feel different from exercises they've previously undertaken, because it does look and feel so real.
I can imagine as well, there must be an element of seeing how these organizations will collaborate and work together in a live fire experience like this as well, especially when you're talking about you've got different maturity levels and all that. Does AEMO play sort of like a central coordinator role if there were to be an actual cyber attack affecting multiple energy organizations?
Yeah, we do. So we certainly in the national electricity market on the East Coast, or the NEM as we call it, we're formally responsible for coordination of response to cyber incidents where there's sort of a potential to impact the operation of those grids and markets more broadly, right? So it's a very interconnected industry, and there can be very real-time quick impacts to another organization due to a cyber incident impacting either AEMO or one of our market participant organizations, and those impacts can proliferate really quickly. In 2017, there was an event in South Australia called the South Australia Black Event. You may remember there were some blackouts due to some high winds and some problems with the configuration of some wind turbines in South Australia. And off the back of that, there was a review called the Finkel Review, and a number of recommendations came out of that in relation to cybersecurity as another risk to the Australian power system. One of those recommendations was around trying to get a better handle on how coordinated cyber incident response would work, and to increase the tempo of exercises in the energy sector. And so years later, we were formally given the responsibility for that. And so, part of our objectives with this exercise, very selfishly, is us understanding how we would perform that function, because we're in the position where we're practicing for the type of event that does not happen every day, right? And you want to be ready. So we need to exercise with everyone to understand what response to something really significant will look like.
Did you adapt a lot of what you learned from Trident 1 and Trident 2 based on what you learned about the maturity of these different providers as you were going through the process? Or were you, even going into Trident 1, were you aware of what you might be dealing with there?
So maturity aside for a moment, what we know is that we have a really great collaborative industry, and there's some elements to that, which is large parts of the industry are not competitive with one another because they're sort of in different geographical areas and things like that. And there's such dependence on one another that there's acknowledgement of that threat. So we know we've got a sector of great collaborators as a starting point. When we ran the exercise the first year, roughly 2/3 of the participants participated in the tabletop track, and the other third were doing that more functional play. In Trident 2, we saw a reversal of that. So almost 3/4 of the participants did some kind of functional play, and only 1/4 to 1/3 were doing that tabletop play. So what we've seen over the course of the exercise is a real desire to engage in more functional and challenging exercising, and an uptick in that exercise maturity, I guess we would call it, which is great. So I think that tells us what we're doing is effective.
Absolutely.
Fortunately, yeah.
Well, I can imagine it's like any organization that kind of dips their toes in this for a while. I know most places I worked, we start with a tabletop, something that's not too hard. Let's just go through the injects and role play it. But then that desire to do more kind of always naturally comes out based on what they learn, right?
And we've all walked out of tabletop exercises and gone, there is no way that is how that would play out, right? Like everyone's best intentions.
Don't fight the scenario.
But There's a lot of potential for overconfidence around how you would respond to certain things, how certain things would play out. And so I think the other fortunate thing of running it the way we have run it is that the tabletop participants are exercising alongside the more functional participants, and so they can see it. And then the functional participants articulate well how valuable that is for them. And so there's this kind of natural center of gravity that forms around more functional exercising as a result.
And I think those requests from the participating organizations to up the ante, to give them that opportunity to participate in a more technically challenged, more complex scenario, and that higher level of exercising being that more functional kind of state is really fantastic feedback, and probably indicative of the good work that both the AEMO team and my team are doing to deliver such an impactful exercise for people.
There were some standout outcomes that you were really excited to talk about, which was around a community of exercise planners and practitioners that have formed around this as well as a result of the exercises. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
It really excites me to go into the next planning cycle, knowing that I'll be working with some of the same people from these participant organizations that I worked with last year to do it and the year before. We've had a persistent team with the Retrospect Labs team as well, in terms of having the same resources working with us year on year. And so it's fantastic to build that kind of network of people that you're familiar with. You're familiar with how they work and some of the challenges that they have internally in terms of trying to get the exercise to work for them. And that allows you to kind of more effectively plan it, to know how you can effectively communicate with everyone. So knowing that we have that sort of network of people that we can confidently work with, and we've gotten through this before, they trust us in terms of the scenario, in terms of what needs to go into it, and we can trust them in terms of doing their bit and what they need to do, is a fantastic outcome of what we've been doing over the last couple of years, I think.
Yeah, and what a great byproduct that exercising is becoming more and more popular. We're seeing it driven by more and more requirements from legislation, government, regulators, industry standards and frameworks. So to be able to create that community within the energy sector where people are building that, exercise capacity and their muscle memory and their ability to run exercises internally, even separate from the AEMO Retrospect Labs Trident series, I think that's just such a positive community building aspect that we've been able to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of answers a question I had in my mind a little bit, which is, what would you recommend, or what advice, or what do you think other industries or sectors could learn from what you're doing here?
I think there's something there around the building of that capacity and the uplift that we've been able to achieve over the 2 Trident exercises that we've run. So AEMO or Retrospect Labs, we don't evaluate individual organizations' performance. We enable them to self-evaluate. We provide them with some frameworks and some tools for them to do that. But we do get some really useful feedback from them on the things that they've identified as areas for improvement and what they'd like to focus on testing for future exercises. So being able to, I guess, have that sense of we've delivered that meaningful uplift for those organizations, and, the learnings from year 2, Trident 2, are different from the learnings of year 1, Trident 1. It's pretty fantastic to see across the sector. So that maturing piece, I think, for those organizations, and that they're able to continually test these processes and know that they have iterated and that they have improved is a really, really nice to have. And so I think AEMO really deserves some credit for leading this work within the sector. And they've certainly established a really great framework for what these sector exercises can look like and the benefit for organizations that participate. As we've just talked about, it's not just that technical or that process uplift. It's about creating that community and that, capability within the sector to undertake these kinds of activities, to actually, look at improving their incident response capability and look at how they can respond more effectively to the, very complex and difficult threats we as network defenders really face.
Tom, what's something you know now that you wish you knew going into coordinating? Sorry, it's a little question without notice there.
I continue to be blown away by the positivity of the people that we work with to do these exercises. And the reason I say that is because I think cybersecurity professionals are professional pessimists in a lot of ways. It can be really hard to see the kind of bright side of a lot of what we're doing. But I'm continued to be blown away every year by the way that the people lean into what we are doing. They trust in us to deliver an effective exercise. And I think, starting 2 years ago, where we were really trying to reestablish some of that trust in exercising. And I think a lot of organizations had potentially been involved in exercises that were less relevant, you sink a bunch of resources and effort into them, you get the execs in the room and then they don't go so well. And there's nothing worse than that.
Been there.
Yeah. And I think we're very fortunate that our audience is very hungry for, and our participants were very hungry for a great exercise. And I think at the end of where we are now 2 years later.
At the end of Trident 1 and Trident 2, people are asking, when is the next one coming? Rather than the sense of dread and foreboding of, oh God, we have to do another one. So, it is optional, their participation in Trident. Yeah. I think that's important to flag. It's not mandated. And, we encourage them and support them to do so, but it is an opt-in thing. So the fact that they're still eager to do it and they're not yet sick of us is really positive.
We're very fortunate. So we've got such a mix of participants, and I think we've got some participants that sort of rely on the fact that we are facilitating and coordinating this exercise to get over the line internally and sort of get the technical kind of preceding activity done, or even to kind of participate in the first place. It's, AEMO's coordinating it, so many other organizations are participating in it, so we should do it too. There are also organizations that are really fantastic at what they do, and they take our scenario and they extend it, and they, take the tradecraft that we've put in the scenario and then go, okay, well, what would that really look like on these specific systems that we have? And then they kind of write specific scripts and do specific activities that are bespoke to their environment. We've got those that just want us to go harder and harder every year. So it's amazing, right? Because we get this real mix of attitudes, levels of interest, maturity, and that allows us to, we have this unique challenge now of how do we keep those with really sort of high expectations who are quite sophisticated in how they participate, how do we keep them kind of involved and continue to push the boundaries for them while also keeping everyone else on board too, and not creating something that's inaccessible, that's sort of too hard or too resource intensive to participate in. So yes, this kind of Swiss Army knife where we need to be able to help with everything and just be kind of right size and good return on investment and all those kinds of things. So some real challenges to be navigated as we continue, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act, and, very helpful to have amazing people like Tom and the AEMO team, obviously led by Tim Daly and the amazing Jason Smith, as well as the amazing people from my team at Retrospect Labs. And it's been amazing to see how the two organizations can come together and produce this pretty complex piece of work. We're not exactly throwing 300 resources at it. So it's amazing to see what we can produce with not that many people and being able to meet those needs. It's a pretty awesome thing to be involved in.
Looking forward, we've got Trident 3 on the horizon. Can you talk a little bit about how you're evolving things, or how you're going to continue to evolve things to keep that engagement high and fresh?
The further along we get, the more challenging it gets to make something that caters to all of those that want to be involved in the exercise. I think we've got a real mission ahead to keep the scenario credible, because that's the foundation of what's been interesting to everyone, and really kind of push that participation so far, while also making something that's sophisticated and exciting and all of that kind of thing. It's funny, like going into the third planning round now, I'm far less stressed around how are we going to get it done. Like we've got
well, it can be. Yeah.
We've got a really good team. We know it can be done.
I'm stressed, but that's fine.
Yeah. and I know
your reputation on the line. So.
I know we'll be exhausted at the other end, because we are every year, but I think now it's been a genuine career highlight for me to be able to plan and deliver this exercise alongside the team. And I think when we start to think about, well, what will the legacy of it be? What will it be remembered for? Like, really, the third time around is where we need to be delivering on the big objectives. And I think the threat environment's rapidly deteriorating. And so the readiness of the energy sector for significant incidents has never been more important.
Well, I think it's interesting because there's some really large scale exercises that occur. I'm sure everyone's heard of Cyberstorm, et cetera, and they occur at this really, really pointy end, right? But to be able to do these smaller sector exercises, really deliver, more up the ante, offer those different modes of participation, different levels of complexity for different maturity levels within organizations who are participating. And I'm not sure that that's happening as frequently as it should across at that sector level.
Yeah.
So the emphasis at that really pointy end. And then for me, there's this really big gap where the opportunity to improve is so critically important, because as Tom's just said, the threat landscape is rapidly changing and it's not getting better. It's only getting worse, and it's getting more challenging for network defenders. So it's really, really critically important that we're doing these kinds of things at this point in time. So I think it's fantastic to see that we are starting to do it. And I think it would be great to see more of it occurring at that sector level.
If another sector did want to run something similar, like what are some of the advice that could be offered based on the experience that you've had?
So I think there's a few things that when you're considering running this kind of exercise, you really do need to consider. I mentioned before that we're a relatively lean team in terms of delivering this. So your resources and the time impost on organizing an exercise, not just all of the important work around the scenario development, building technical artifacts, et cetera. Just the sheer kind of project management logistical piece is quite a large body of work, right? So just making sure you've got the right support systems and processes in place for that, I think, is really critically important. And having someone that's able to really lead the delivery of the project, not necessarily lead the delivery of the exercise, but lead the delivery of the project, be that spokesperson, be the face of the exercise, if you will, as Tom was, and really, build and develop, that capability and that capacity to effectively deliver, I think, is just as important as actually getting the exercise content right. The second thing I'd say there is having those relationships. So Tom has alluded to this. Having those connections and those relationships with the participating organizations makes it so much easier, because you have that sense of trust. They're willing to share their war stories with you. They're willing to ask those tough questions, admit that they're perhaps a little bit anxious about participating, not sure what it's going to look like for them. And it's just that open dialogue that means they get a better result and a better outcome, because you have that connection and that relationship with them to troubleshoot things, reassure them where you need to, or just steer them in the right direction. And then the third thing I'd say, and we have talked about this, it really does come back to being that really, really effective scenario. It cannot just be a generic scenario that people undertake and come away feeling underwhelmed by. We want people to be challenged by it. We want it to, open up questions about, are we prepared to deal with this kind of threat type, this specific actor tradecraft, this kind of incident within our environment? What do we really need to do to make sure that we're actually ready to respond to it when it happens? So that scenario piece, the exercise, it's just so critically important to get that right and make it appropriate for those participating organizations. It has to be fit for purpose, has to be technically feasible. It has to be geared or targeted at the right level of maturity for those participating organizations. It can't be too easy for them. It can't be too difficult for them. It's a big challenge to get that right, but it just has to get nailed. Otherwise, the exercise will not achieve those objectives, aims, and outcomes.
I really appreciate that. I don't work in NGO, I work in higher education, but like it's the same kind of thing. It's good to be able to build those relationships within a sector because the jobs can be pretty isolating at times. And so in any industry where you've got someone who you can email or pick up the phone, who you've built, especially building relationships through an exercise like this, it didn't even occur to me the networking and community that must have built so that CISO or organization X can just pick up the phone and say, oh, geez,
absolutely.
Because sometimes you just a CISO needs to pick up the phone, or anyone in security needs to be able to pick up the phone and just say, warts and all, this is my problem. What do you think?
Being an incident response or being a network defender is not an easy job. The bad guys are better resourced than us. They're highly motivated. They're, coming at us nonstop, right? And they probably have half the amount of other stuff to deal with that we have to deal with just by the nature of working in the roles and the organizations that we work at. So it's really, really challenging. And I think it's just not a question of if that incident's going to happen to you, but when, and it's probably already happened to someone else. So you have a lot to learn from being able to rely on a network, leverage those relationships, and help others out who maybe, have the opportunity to defend themselves before an incident that has occurred to you happens to them. If you are able to share threat intelligence, indicators of compromise, if you are able to be open about your response activities, what worked well, what didn't work well. And that's something that was really great in the debriefs that we ran as a part of the Trident series, was organizations openly sharing those key learnings, understanding and talking to each other about where they fared well during the exercise and where they perhaps could have done a little bit better. Of course, no one's perfect. No organization's perfect. No incident response plan is perfect. So the importance of being able to test these and improve them and share those findings with the community is really, really important, really, really powerful. Not to put you on the spot, but I wonder if just sharing how Trident 1, how the surf calls ran versus Trident 2, the dashboard, and how that was a learning for AEMO. So it wasn't just the participating orgs, you guys learnt as well and iterated and improved.
It probably goes to a couple of our core exercise methodology principles. One of them is that we absolutely exercise to fail, right? We don't want to walk away from the exercise feeling like, oh, we did awesome. That's probably number one. The other sort of approach that we take is that we absolutely do not exercise to find findings that we already know what the findings are. And if that means using the exercise as a forcing function to get some other stuff done, that is where you want to be, right? So it's much better to kind of exercise and test a solution and go, here's what doesn't work with that solution or that process, than to go, oh, we don't have a solution or a process for that, right? So yeah, we want to avoid absolutely having findings that we knew what they were when we started planning the exercise. I mentioned that incident coordination role that we have, and as part of that incident coordination role, we've got the capacity to kind of get the impacted organizations on a bridge to try and work out, the status of the incident, what's going on, that kind of thing. And that's a really important kind of coordination functional mechanism for us so that we can work with the right people internally to better understand what might arise from a cyber incident. Now, the first time we ran that, we kind of practiced that in Trident in 2024. And what we found is that those calls run for a very, very long time, right? And even, I mentioned earlier, we did that exercise in 3 groups. So, we might have had 10 organizations on a call, and that call went for
an hour and a half.
An hour and a half,
it was
right?
A little too long.
Which is too long in the context of everyone's responding to a serious cyber incident. So that was a finding, right? Mm-hmm. This year, we kind of developed some tools basically to allow us to gather information from our exercise participants and then visually represent that. And what that meant is that instead of participants giving an update on the status of their incident, they give an update on where they might differ to the overall kind of picture of where the incident's at a whole of sector level. And that cuts down the briefing significantly, right? And people can look at that and go, oh, that's different to what I've been seeing. Oh, actually, I'm not quite correctly represented up there. And it kind of, vastly cut down the time that's involved in getting those updates and communicating that information. So it was a proof of concept solution. And as I said, we knew that was a gap and we didn't want to run the exercise again and have the same findings. So I'm very fortunate that we have a fantastic team at AEMO and people that can get in and develop solutions to these problems. And yeah, so we tried a solution that worked really well. Feedback was really, really positive. And so now it's on us to then try and kind of get something a bit more sort of persistent, more production kind of level for that.
Well, we might have to get you back to hear how the third installment in the trilogy goes.
Yes.
Well, that is fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been really, really fascinating just to hear about something that I had. I mean, coming into this, I had no idea of the sheer scope and size of the work that you're doing together between Retrospect and AEMO and the broader sector. So congratulations to you both. Really looking forward to hearing how number 3 goes. And thank you so much for coming and sharing your voices with us today.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sanar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@aisa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an AISA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An AISA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at aisa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.